good afternoon. My name is Sam Adams, and I'm the director of the U.S. Climate Initiatives team here at WRI, World Resources Institute. And I'd like to welcome you, those of you here in the room, and also the audience watching via live stream online, to our town hall on getting serious about pricing carbon in the U.S. The basis of today's discussion is the release of the U.S. Climate Initiative team's recent research, which should be in each of your folders. You can also find it online at the WRI.org website. It's a lot of W's and R's. We're really glad that you're with us today. If you're not familiar with WRI, it is a global nonprofit that works closely with leaders to address 6 urgent global challenges at the intersection of economic development and the natural environment: food, forest, water, climate, energy, and cities. The U.S. Climate Initiative program, here we use vigorous independent research and strategic partnerships to help advance this nation's transition to a strong, low-carbon economy. And the research that you're going to be hearing about today, that is going to be discussed, that you will have an opportunity as part of this town hall setting to participate in, is research that shows that a price on carbon in the U.S. is an effective, market-oriented option to spur innovation, to create economic growth, and to help the United States achieve its ambitious carbon reduction goals. For a variety of reasons, this is a great time to be talking about this topic. Carbon pricing is a political option that is showing signs of growing appeal across the political spectrum. Today, after we give you a brief summary of the research findings, we're going to have a panel discussion, and you'll hear from voices on both sides of the political aisle. Moderated by Andrew Steer, the CEO and president of WRI. Our panelists today will be former Republican Congressman Bob Inglis, Greg Dotson, Vice President for Energy Policy at the Center for American Progress, David Bailey, a consultant with more than 30 years working in the oil and gas industry, and Christina DiConcini, WRI's own Director of Government Affairs, who's got a great pulse on the politics of this issue. 2 quick notes, though, before we proceed. First, a deep note of thanks to all the reviewers of the draft research, especially the external reviewers that took the time to look at the draft work and provide comments on it. Your input has helped make this research the robust and reliable product that it is. And I, as leader of the U.S. Climate Initiatives team, want to thank the members of the team that worked on this, including Deputy Director Kevin Kennedy, who is the lead author, Mike Obiter, who you're going to hear from in a few minutes with the summary, as co-author, Noah Kaufman, also an author, and important research contributions from team members Kristen Meek and Rebecca Gasper. Second are housekeeping notes. This is going to be a town hall, so after Mike does the initial summary presentation, you'll have a chance to ask questions from the floor, clarifying questions, and then we'll go into the panel discussion. This does not look like a shy crowd, but in case you have a moment of shyness, in your folders are these index cards, and you can write your question down on an index card, and Reese in the back there, just hold it up or hand it to Reese. And Reese will make sure that Andrew gets the question and it is included in the panel discussion. Second housekeeping note, WRI is live tweeting. The Twitter account handles are at World Resources and at WRI Climate. Please use the hashtag #PriceOnCarbon. And one last housekeeping note, following this event, we'll be having beverages and a reception and some food in the foyer, so please join us. So let's move to the substance of why we're here. Michael is a senior associate in the U.S. Climate Initiative team. Prior to joining WRI, he was the analyst for energy and the environment for the Senate Budget Committee, where he had a front row seat to the cap and trade debates of 2009 and 2010. Please join me in welcoming Michael Oetter.
Thanks very much, Sam. Thank you to everybody for coming today. Can you all hear me? Good. So as Sam mentioned, my name is Michael Oetter. I'm one of the co-authors of this report entitled Putting a Price on Carbon, a Handbook for U.S. Policymakers. As is hopefully evident from the title of the publication, we intend this to be a reference guide that can help inform future policy debates on this issue. Why price carbon? And why address this question now? Well, past WRI analysis has indicated that our 2020 and 2025 greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets can be met through ambitious use of existing authorities. But we also know that existing authorities alone are not going to be enough to allow us to achieve the deep emissions reductions we need in the coming decades. Pricing carbon can be part of the long-term solution to help us meet our emissions reductions goals. But a carbon price is not just a climate policy, it's an economic policy as well. Depending on how it's designed and what is done with the revenues, carbon price can serve numerous policy goals, including promoting economic growth by reducing taxes, supporting clean energy and development, research and development, and assisting those affected by climate change and the transition from high carbon resources. We believe there are a wide range of benefits that could be achieved by a well-designed carbon price. What this paper does is provide a broad-based view of the carbon pricing landscape. We envision that it'll be a useful primer for those who are new to the conversation and serve as a refresher and a reference guide for those who have been deep in the weeds on this issue in the past. In short, we expect this paper to help inform the future debate on whether, when, and how to implement a national carbon price in the United States. In future WRI publications will build on this foundation and will take a deeper dive into some of the more significant issues surrounding pricing carbon. We begin our paper with a brief discussion on how a carbon price works before moving to a brief history of carbon pricing programs in the US and around the globe. We then take a look at the key design features and choices facing policymakers. And among those, one of the most important design decisions facing those policymakers is what to do with revenue. We examine the advantages and disadvantages of many of the most commonly proposed revenue options. And lastly, we include a broad overview of the economic literature on carbon pricing. Now, a lot of people in this room are probably already familiar with the basics of how a carbon price works, so I'll keep this relatively brief. In essence, emitters pay for the carbon pollution that they produce. In response, the price of emissions-intensive fuels and goods increases, and lower emissions alternatives become more attractive and cheaper by comparison. Low carbon innovation is encouraged, and emissions fall. And as this graphic illustrates, there are other reasons besides climate to like a carbon pricing policy. The government takes in revenue, which it can then put to use in a number of productive ways. Anything from lowering distortionary taxes to reducing the deficit to returning money to households or any number of productive options. The concept of increasing the price of something we want less of in order to address an inefficiency in the market is nearly a century old. In 1920, English economist Arthur Pigou developed the concept of externalities, that is, costs or benefits that are not captured in the price of a good. In order to provide an incentive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, whose costs are often not incorporated in the price of emissions-intensive fuels and goods, many countries and subnational regions have implemented a carbon price over the last 25 years. While it may seem exotic to some, nearly 40 countries and over 26 subnational jurisdictions now have implemented either a cap-and-trade, a carbon tax, or both, including 7 pilot programs in China. Together, these programs cover approximately 12% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. In the US, 9 northeastern states participate in a power sector cap-and-trade program, and California recently started an economy-wide cap-and-trade program that really went into effect in earnest in the beginning of 2013. Of course, there have been a number of proposals at the federal level as well, dating back to 2003 with the McCain-Lieberman bill. Perhaps the most famous carbon pricing policy was the Waxman-Markey bill that passed the House of Representatives in 2009, but did not come up for a vote in the Senate. New proposals, such as those from Senators Whitehouse and Schatz, continue to emerge. And just recently, Congressman John Delaney announced a new proposal for a carbon tax at an event at the American Enterprise Institute. All of this is to say that carbon prices are not a new phenomenon and are now very well understood. And they have broad support as well. There are a number of conservative leaders, for example, including George Shultz, Art Laffer, Hank Paulson, that support this idea, as do approximately 2/3 of the American public, according to a recent Stanford University poll. Now, when designing a carbon pricing program, the first choice most policymakers face is carbon tax or cap and trade. They're not the only policy options out there, but they are probably the two most popular. Both provide economic incentives to reduce emissions and minimize compliance costs, and both face many of the same design and revenue decisions. The primary difference between the two is that a carbon tax provides price certainty into the future, while cap and trade offers emission certainty. After deciding between cap and trade and the carbon tax, there are a number of key design issues that decision makers must address. For example, which greenhouse gases should be included in the program? Just carbon dioxide, all of them, or some subset thereof? Which sectors should be included? And are the emissions reductions from a sector worth the economic and administrative burden of including it in the program? Where should the carbon price be implemented? Upstream, where the emissions enter the economy, or downstream, where they're produced? What should the initial price or cap be? And how should that price increase or cap decrease over time? Should there be a border tax measure, a border measure to address any competitiveness concerns that arise? How should the policy be monitored and enforced? And what complementary policies are needed to ensure that the climate and alternative policy goals are met? We can find a few examples of these design principles in practice in North America. As I mentioned, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative covers 9 northeastern states in the US. This is a power sector cap and trade program that addresses carbon dioxide emissions. And the designers of RGGI had decided to return most of the revenues to households and businesses in order to offset any potential price increases in energy costs. And British Columbia has had a carbon tax in place for a number of years now. It started at 10 Canadian dollars and is now up to 30 Canadian dollars, or approximately $25 US. The tax is applied upstream. It covers approximately 3/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions in the province, and most of the revenues are devoted to reducing personal and corporate income taxes. Now, as these two examples illustrate, revenues can be used to accomplish various objectives. They can be used to promote economic growth. They can offset any adverse impacts of a carbon price, or they can serve as investments in adapting to climate change, amongst many other options. And the amount of revenue we're talking about can be substantial. For example, even at a relatively modest price of $15 per metric ton of greenhouse gas emissions, the US could raise approximately $100 billion. So one possible use of all of this revenue is a so-called revenue neutral tax swap, where the government reduces other taxes by the same amount of revenue that they bring in from a carbon price. This option is popular with many economists because it's a way to reduce taxes on things we want more of, like labor and capital, while simultaneously reducing the incentive to produce something we want less of, in this case, harmful greenhouse gas emissions. So these economists ask, why not raise money by taxing destructive instead of productive activities? For example, carbon price revenues can be used to offset reductions in corporate or personal income taxes or the payroll tax. Another option is to simply send every household in the country a check with an equal share of carbon pricing revenue. This has the advantage of being relatively simple to administer and returns all or nearly all of the revenue it takes in back to households. Lastly, it ensures that the poor, who are often hardest hit by a carbon price because they spend a larger share of their incomes on energy expenses, are not negatively affected by the carbon price. Of course, these are not the only commonly cited proposals for revenue use, and a carbon tax can serve additional policy objectives as well. These include deficit reduction. Reducing deficits today obviates the need for future tax increases. Providing transition assistance for affected regions or groups that may be harder hit by a carbon price. Investing in research and development for low carbon technologies, which can drive deeper and more cost-effective emissions reductions in the future. Or investing in adaptation measures to help communities cope with some of the climate impact we're already seeing today. Importantly, different uses of revenue are of interest to different stakeholders across the political spectrum. Now, what does the literature say about the economic impacts of a carbon price, setting aside any environmental benefits? First, we should point out that the vast majority of economists support such a policy. When the question was put to a panel of distinguished economists, including Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, the vast majority of them either agreed or strongly agreed with the sentiment that the government is better served raising revenue from a carbon tax than from labor income taxes. Now, there are many, many economic studies out there, including a number by some folks in this room, and they come at this question from a variety of different angles, and they pose different hypotheses in their studies. But there is agreement on some key core findings. First, there are winners and losers in the short run from a carbon price. But a well-designed policy can offset most or all of any negative impacts through targeted uses of revenue. And lastly, there is no free lunch. There's always going to be trade-offs. For example, there's a trade-off between using revenue in ways that maximize economic growth and using some revenue to ensure that the incidence of a carbon price does not fall disproportionately hard on the poor. So in conclusion, it's clear that a carbon price can achieve a multitude of objectives, not the least of which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the process of crafting a well-designed carbon policy involves a number of important decisions that can help bring additional stakeholders into the discussion. Finally, a quick note that this is not the last you're going to hear from WRI on these issues.
Good.
Our goal is to promote dialogue on why and how to implement a carbon price in the US. And to that end, we are going to be publishing a series of issue briefs in the coming months that will dive deeper into some of the more significant issues surrounding carbon pricing. These may include a deeper dive into the economic incentives to reduce emissions, how a carbon price could affect some regions more than others, and how to address some of those regional disparities, and how a carbon price can drive innovation in lower emitting technologies. So again, thank you all for coming today. We've got time for a few clarifying questions on the paper before we move to the panel discussion. For this one, you may have to raise your hand and not hand a postcard to Reese. Yes?
You don't like the dividends, you prefer a tax reduction, or I get the impression. But isn't tax reduction really trickle-up economics? You take from the poor and it trickles up to the rich?
First, just a clarification, WRI does not have any particular stance on how best to use revenues at this time. We acknowledge that all of them come with some benefits and some trade-offs. So we're not recommending any particular revenue use at this time. We are planning on doing more research into this topic, as I mentioned, and so in the future we may take a stance on revenue usage. To the second part of your question, tax reductions can be designed in any number of ways. There have been proposals for reducing corporate income taxes, personal income taxes, payroll taxes. Any other number of different tax cuts can be implemented, and so each of those comes with different pluses and minuses, advantages and disadvantages. We get into some of that in the paper, but it is designed to be a broad overview, so I encourage you to read some of Adele Morris's and Aparna Mathur's papers on the subject. Yes, James.
James Hanley, Carbon Tax Center. Thank you. James Hanley, Carbon Tax Center. First of all, I just very quickly, skimmed through your paper. It looks really terrific. I was glad to see the full chart there on revenue options. I think that's really an important conversation to be having about what can be done. It really sort of stirs people's imaginations, and I think that's an interesting conversation. I wonder what you're thinking. I didn't see anything in here about the trajectory. I noticed you mentioned that as one of the policy variables. And have you done any analysis or modeling about what would be needed to drive emissions reductions to the levels that we think are needed to stay within 2 degrees C warming?
The short answer to that question is no. We have not yet modeled the level of carbon price that would be necessary to bring emissions down to a level that's consistent with 2 degrees Celsius warming. Generally speaking, it depends obviously on complementary policies that are in place that can help drive emissions reductions. Until we have a bill, legislative language that we can analyze, it's going to be tough for us to weigh in definitively on that question. But it is something that we definitely keep in mind, and it's definitely a topic we hope to address in more detail in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of WRI. He oversees the staff here at WRI, 450 experts and staff. He is a frequent speaker at global audiences, an accomplished economist, and a fantastic boss. So, Andrew Steer.
Oh, bless you. Could we invite the distinguished panel to come and sit up here? This is going to be, I'm sure, a great discussion. And those that Sam didn't actually introduce himself. He recently. Is this on, by the way? No. Maybe there's another one that does work. Thanks very much. Sam recently joined us. Before that, he was mayor of Portland, Oregon, one of the greenest and most exciting cities in the United States with a global reputation. And so it's great to have someone who understands politics down where it really makes a difference. So really delighted you're here, Sam. Look, I'm just going to ask sort of one question to each of them, different questions, and then we really want to open this up. I mean, in this room we have a lot of really knowledgeable people on this, so I hope we're going to explore even some of the technical issues, but I want to start on sort of the political issues and sort of where we are, if you like. And starting with you, Bob Inglis. I mean, you've been a Republican congressman on 2 occasions for a total of 12 years. You listen to this. I mean, who was it? Harry Truman said, give me a one-handed economist. I mean, this is one area where there are just one-handed economists. I mean, it's total agreement. I mean, it's a slam dunk, isn't it? And yet, you paid quite a high price, didn't you? Because the Republican Party isn't united on this, and possibly both parties aren't united on this. Tell us sort of what it would take to get to a different place, and how do you see the politics right now? And if you want to hold that, would that be easier?
Good.
Yeah, there's just... Sorry.
Well, yes, I guess at 6 years in, 6 years out, 6 years back, that makes me recidivist, I think. Well, I think that what is exciting is that the economic consensus is even stronger than the scientific consensus on climate, which is pretty neat. If you look at that chart, right, Michael's chart, it's really pretty exciting. But 2%, Michael, that are uncertain. Yeah. That's really quite a telling figure, and so they're pretty much are one-handed economists. So that's very exciting. What we've got to get through, I think, is some tribal rejectionism. Actually, what I usually call is populist rejectionism. It's clearly populist. It's rejection of the science, rejection of all things Obama, and rejection more fundamentally of the concept that we can come together and solve really big challenges. I think that came to us as a result of the Great Recession. We sort of lost touch with our normal DNA as Americans. And we basically went to this ain't it so bad kind of affect. We're done for, China's taken over. And that's what you can expect when people are feeling pretty sour. But as we come out of that terrible time, I think we're going to refine our normal DNA, which is Americans that say, yeah, you got a problem, we got a solution. Let's get to work on it. And but we got to work through that tribal problem. And so it really is, the science is clear, the economics are even clearer. It's just a political challenge right now. And I think that comes from some validators stepping forward and saying, of course this works for us. And of course this fits with what people believe, of my tribe especially, because I would say to you, if you're here from the environmental left, behold your indispensable partner in conservatives who have so far rejected your ideas on cap and trade and your ideas on a regulatory solution through the Clean Air Act. And so you got to get them. And I think the way we can get them is to show them that not market something to them, but just help them to see that what they deeply believe is completely consistent with a solution that'll work, which is pricing carbon dioxide.
Great. I want to come back to you in just a second. But after we've heard from industry and energy, David Bailey, you've been in that business for a long, long time. Talk about how the energy sector and the corporate energy sector is seeing this issue right now.
Okay, I want to start though by thanking Mike and Christina and Kevin for the fantastic work that they did on this handbook. It really is, I think, a very helpful contribution to the debate, even though I don't agree with everything that's in it. I think one of the things I don't agree with is the title about the carbon price, because what most of it's talking about is an explicit carbon price. Because regulatory policies put a price on carbon, it's just a difference. And the difference is that a tax or a cap and trade puts a more explicit price. So from the energy industry's point of view, I think most of them would argue that there already is a price on carbon from that regulation. And the difference is that an overt price potentially allows you to get out from the unovert price, the hidden price. But more important is everybody in this room and millions of people around the world every day make decisions that at the margin impact greenhouse gas emissions. The only way to get into that decision process is a price that gets in there, into that economic discussion. I think a carbon tax is the way to do that. Some designs of cap and trade can get you there eventually, but the regulatory world does not get you to that, into every individual decision that's being made. And that's why I think that people who've been in the energy industry for a long time tend to come back to the carbon tax or cap and trade, perhaps, as the way to go.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, just as sort of a follow-up question. I mean, if you talk to the CEOs of Shell, or Statoil, or BP, three Europe-based majors, they would all say, we believe there should be an explicit price on carbon, and indeed they were part of those that sign up to this, 1,000 corporations saying we believe on that. And I was recently in a meeting with all three of them, and they said, look, we actually are not only going to be public about this, we maybe will stop lobbying against it. We won't actually lobby for it, but we won't lobby against it, we promise. So, but not many American-based majors, and so why is that?
Well, I think the issue is fundamentally that this is not very high on the radar screen. That every Washington office of every major energy company has a list of issues that they're working, and I suspect an over carbon price is kind of down there at number 100 of a list of 100, and it just isn't that high on the radar screen yet. The regulatory issues sure are, but they're much more in a let's stop it mode rather than thinking about what is an alternative.
Okay, thanks very much, Christina. Our Director of Government and Congressional Relations of the Secretary DeConcini, you've known the Senate for a long time. How do you see this? Are you an optimist, and what sort of time frame we thinking about here?
Well, and after, I hope we get back to, I want to make sure that we hear from Congressman Inglis about his very interesting story to tell about why conservatives would want to sign up for this and what the case is for that. And so my answer to that question is that in the short term, no, we're not going to see anything happening on this. But I actually think that this panel, these three panelists here today, are evidence that there are people across the political spectrum that are interested in this. And you can't find that in a lot of policy realms or environmental policy realms. It's hard to point to other ones where you have conservatives, liberals, moderates, industry, different folks in favor of it. So that gives me some reason for hope on this. And then the other is that there's a couple things, there's some movement in our favor. One is that a lot of carbon pricing is happening around the world. As we've seen, there's been a lot of studies showing that we're at the tipping points on various low carbon initiatives. Many of them already now make sense economically, and countries, industries, and others are investing in that, and I think that's going to just continue to grow. And finally, the impacts from climate are being seen more and more, and a piece that I've been working on a bit here is on the local level. It's really quite interesting. It's very, very bipartisan, whether it's Florida, Virginia, or Alabama, where people are dealing with whether it's sea level rise, droughts, snowpack loss, and on if you're a mayor or a person in a county position, people are they're not playing politics around this. They're really, the impacts are trumping ideology in a big way, and I think that there's potential for that to continue to grow, and I think it's going to continue to grow because the impacts are going to keep increasing.
Thanks, Christina. Let's go to Greg Dotson, your Vice President for Energy at the Center for American Progress. You used to work in Capitol Hill, worked on the cap and trade legislation. One of the interesting things raised here, which is obviously a fundamental issue, is what you use the revenues for. And I know you're doing some thinking about that. And based on what you've heard the previous three talking about on Michael said and the revenue issue, go ahead.
Sure. Michael, in his presentation on the handbook, had a slide that kind of blandly said revenues have the opportunity to encourage other stakeholder participation. That's a Washington, D.C. way of saying that there are tens or hundreds of billions of dollars on the table. Yes. And so I think for those of us, I think some excellent points have been made already. Christina, I think, said one of the most important ones, which is this is not something that's going to be we're going to see immediate action on. We're in a foundational period. And we're in a period where we are rebuilding the momentum, understanding, and essentially the infrastructure knowledge that we need to get something significant done. And revenue is an important element of that. And my view is that for anyone of goodwill who is interested in seeing a price on carbon applied, now is the time to exercise sort of most flexibility in thinking along these lines. Because we are in a stage where this line doesn't necessarily need to be drawn at the moment. I work for the Center for American Progress, which is dedicated to improving the lives of Americans through progressive ideas and action. And we see, if you're talking about $150 billion or more, or substantially less, depending on what people are talking about, you're in the ballpark of having an opportunity to address some of the really tough income inequality issues that people are struggling with. We've seen a lot of economic growth that has not been uniformly felt by every household, and it's an opportunity to address that. Some of the proposals out there but not go to that, we think that's a very important element to have a conversation.
Great, thanks so much. Well, I'm sure we'll probe that issue a little bit more. Could we come back to you, Congressman English? I mean, clearly this is
Excuse me, can we have the volume a little higher?
Can you not hear?
It's
Not that
struggling
well.
to hear all the panels.
The microphones are directional, and you've got to point them at the speaker. So.
Okay, so if we could all get closer to our microphones, please, don't be shy. This is the trouble, actually, of the environmental movement, is that we haven't been loud enough talking about these issues. So let's speak up. Obviously, this isn't a sprint. This is going to take some time, but eventually rationality clearly does kick in, and there has to come a time when we hope, maybe tragically as the impacts of climate change become more evident, that views will change, maybe starting with citizens, maybe starting with business, maybe starting with political leaders. It takes some pretty sophisticated political analysis and actions in order to move this forward faster than it would go naturally. Do you have any insights as to how that needs to happen here?
Well, we are looking for tipping points, right? You can't quite predict when they're going to come. I think that the way I describe it, answering sort of the way building in or adding on to what Greg said, is it's a building year coach. That's what you say when you're not winning yet, right? And so we're not exactly winning yet, but, and I don't want to overstate our progress among conservatives, but I deeply believe that conservatives know that you want all the cost in on all the fuels and you want the subsidies removed. And if you do that, then you can fix the problem. It's sort of like if we're going into business together and we have a choice between option A and option B, we really want our accountant to tell us all the cost of A and all the cost of B. And it'll be a very sour surprise if we get on down the road and find out that he or she didn't tell us about the cost of B. And this sort of analysis makes sense to people who really believe in free enterprise. And so the thing that doesn't make sense to them is regulatory answers, because that's just anathema. The complexity of cap and trade, frankly, didn't make sense to them. It didn't make sense to me. I voted against it. But we can propose something much clearer and something that they could get behind, because it makes sense for them. It also, I would suggest, provides an opportunity for a 90-degree turn, whereas I made a little bit of a mistake in making a 180. Apparently in politics, you don't want to do 180. That's where you say, listen, I was just wrong on climate before. That was English 1.0. English 2.0, the new and improved version, I said, no, it's real. I'm sorry, I was wrong. That's apparently, that's a lot of political peril comes with that. But if we can get a 90-degree shift, which is, the problem is I haven't seen a solution that I like yet. I didn't like cap and tax. I don't like 111D. But now you're talking to me about this new thing where we're just untaxing something we want more of, and we're taxing something we maybe want less of. I'm certain we want less of it, but some people could say maybe we want less of it. And so let's change what we tax. And now that I see a solution that I can live with and it fits with my values, I can be for that. And that this is the big question: if the environmental left can withhold for a cycle in naming and shaming while we get that 90-degree shift. Now that's going to be really hard for the environmental left, because it's a terrific opportunity to say, look at so-and-so, Senator so-and-so, how they're changing their position. Let's name them and shame them and say they're still not good enough. Having a guy that got consistent Fs from every environmental group, including the Republicans for Environmental Protection, every cycle. It gets a little bit hurtful after a while, and you start saying, listen, you can't ever please these people. And so if they could just suspend that for a cycle while we watch this move to 90 degrees, then we can line up the votes. And so Now, some of that, some people are saying in English, you're a dreamer, man. I mean, you think that the environmental left can withhold, do you think that people will do that switch? Well, I think that we just heard the main reason why is experience is a very effective but often harsh teacher. And we will be taught about climate change. So we're going to find out, and there's going to be a need for a solution. But if I can also add this, if we could just change the terminology a little bit too, so that it's not all this doom and gloom stuff. I mean, there's way too much talk in the environmental left about the doom and gloom that's waiting us, the apocalyptic visions. It just drives conservatives crazy when they hear that. Because you know what, a lot of those predictions in the 70s just didn't come true. I mean, about all the terrible things that were going to befall us and how civilization was going to end. It just hadn't been true. And so if we get back off of that and start talking a different language about this, consistent with somebody like David Bailey's background in energy, is we're talking more energy, more mobility, more freedom, lighting up the dark places of the world, and reducing the cause of war. In other words, exciting opportunities here. Sure, there's danger, but there's also opportunity. And as I understand, in Mandarin, the word crisis has two characters. One is danger, the other is opportunity. Well, that's how we need to view climate change. Yes, it's a danger. It's also an incredible opportunity. And so that opportunity message works for conservatives. The endangerment kind of protection, nurturing, that works on the left. It doesn't turn cranks on the right. So if you give us the space to use that kind of terminology, we can get people thinking, yeah, this fits with what I believe. I'm good with that. Then we can move the tribal, this fix that we've gotten in with the tribal stop and move it toward action.
So that is a great point. Let me just, I want to open it up after just one more question, if I may, to David. I mean, on the point that Bob was just making, which is actually, you know, whilst a lot of people think putting a price on carbon would add some distortion into the economy, and therefore distortions are bad because we'll become less efficient, in reality, the opposite is true. Taxing things that are good is distortionary. Not taxing things that are bad is distortionary. And actually, as you know, over the last year and a half, we've been working very hard on something called the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate. And the question is, taking smart actions on climate, will it hurt your growth? Or will it help your growth? And the conclusion was, and it was done, well, not done by environmentalists, it was done by a whole bunch of people, including Nobel Prize winners in economics, who are specialists in growth. They concluded, actually, because we are doing the smart thing, which is removing distortions by putting, for example, a price on carbon, we actually will use energy more efficiently. We actually will promote more technology. We actually, because we'll design our cities more effectively, we will save $3 trillion as a globe over the next 15 years in urban development. And we will do what all businesses want. We'll provide long-term confidence in policy. All of those four together, mixed together, actually lead to greater dynamism in the economy, exactly the way the Congressman's saying. Does that work with the business sector?
That would work. Were that what was being proposed, I'm not sure that the particular mix that we face today in the United States achieves that particular nirvana that you're talking about. To start with, I mean, you're quite right. There are plenty of things that distort the energy mix in the economy, subsidies and taxes. But right now we've got another set of distortions being put on it through the regulatory process. And we've also, and this is probably not very popular with many people in this audience, we've got a series of extremely inefficient, wasteful programs from the government supporting green industry. And a carbon tax allows you to take a long, hard look at that. What makes sense? Some of them will make sense because the carbon tax incentive doesn't do what you want it to do, but plenty of them won't. And we've done some studies for actually NGOs, not for the usual suspects, to demonstrate that pretty clearly.
Great. Thanks. The floor is open. Questions or comments, if you want to direct it to someone in particular, please do. That would be great. And if anybody wants to write on a piece of paper, hand it to the end of the line, that would be very good. There are people standing at the back. They're perfectly good chairs at the front, and they're all the same price. So come up here by all means. Do. Yes, sir. Maybe say who you are and.
Alan Greenberg, Department of Transportation. My comments are my own. Putting aside Congressman Inglis's preference for a straight carbon tax, it seems that politically, at least it's conceivable that what the administration's proposing with the power rule could pass political muster. And there are other ways of getting carbon price in other areas that might be possible without congressional action. And in transportation, the areas I'm familiar with are things like paid per mile auto insurance, converting the benefit that most employers offer their employees in parking. 95% of private sector employers provide their employees free parking if you would require cash out for that, and so forth. You could get really much, at least for the transportation sector, a price incentive that would actually be higher than anything I've seen modeled if you would couple policies like that. It seems to be that we keep looking at something that isn't going to get politically anywhere for at least a little while. I mean, in all due respect to your point of view, I hope you're right. But what I see is, Grover Norquist running around and more people signing his no tax pledge and so on and so forth. So I don't see the movement. I hope you're right, and what I don't see is there. But so that's my question. Thank you.
Well, that's an interesting point. Greg, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for the question.
You have to. You must get closer. That's it. Speak with authority.
Can you hear me better? Yes. So I think you raised a really good point, and the rule of thumb that people use when they think about pricing carbon is that for every dollar you're going to raise gasoline prices by 1 penny. And so when you apply that out to any kind of tax that anyone is really talking about, you're not talking about a price that's going to transform the transportation sector, like you're saying. It's something that is easily digestible in the ebbs and flows of oil markets, and we see that every day. And so it goes to it really puts a fine point on the importance of maintaining regulation where it's appropriate, because the Clean Air Act is driving efficiency in automobiles and alternative technologies, electrification of fleet. They have the authority to do that. That's happening, and it's a tool that we would make a huge mistake if we traded it away for a carbon price. So I would just flag that, and I think that those kinds of creative things you're talking about are worth looking at as well.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
I think that there's a real risk, I think, in sort of doing the constant threat of doing without legislation. In other words, we're going to ram this through. Now, how do you think that sits with people that are currently in control of the House and the Senate? And do you think there's going to be a reaction to that? And is that what reactionary things are about? It's something like this. If you have a boss who's constantly threatening you, he or she's probably already failed to lead the organization, haven't they? In other words, they're not inspiring you. So now all they're doing is threatening you. So they must have failed in leadership. So how about figure out how to lead? By saying, this works for you. I respect your views. I understand what you're trying to do. I understand your deep commitment to free enterprise. And this could work for you. And if you're good at that, you can convince people. Now, I got to acknowledge I lost a Republican primary, all right? So apparently I wasn't very good at it among some people in the reddest district, the reddest state of the nation, maybe. But surely we can find some leaders that are good at it that can say, come on, let's come together. Let's find a solution and not do this, ram it through with executive orders. Then you get this the obvious litigation, you get the obvious defunding attempts of the EPA, and then you have this continuing toxicity to the political process. I know I'm a little bit of a dreamer, but I think it's possible to lead and to bring people together. You gotta go play golf with John Boehner, and you gotta have Mitch John for a movie with Mitch. You gotta do these things, and then you get your leader. You're not a sort of a dictator threatening things from your ensconced office. That's a position of real weakness if you think about it.
Okay, now we have something to discuss. Please.
Hi, John Hanson, Citizens Climate Lobby. This is actually a subtlety. You mentioned the Grover Norquist pledge. And I remember in reading that and looking at some different policies, one of the things that stood out to me, and this might be a very fine thing, and maybe you could tell us if this is a sort of an entryway or a loophole in the ideology, is that it said no increased cost. That's ultimately what it was. And if you have a revenue neutral carbon tax, are we able to sidestep something like that and avoid those issues? So,
in fact, I'm glad you followed up because I was going to answer that, but I got to go in on that. I'm sorry, I had to go hold forth about that threatening stuff. But I would say this: a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax, as I understand it, does not violate Grover Norquist's pledge, nor does it violate Americans for Prosperity's pledge. And so we're traveling on that. I've tried to get them to certify that. So far, they're not so clear that they're going to certify that what we're talking about at republicn.org fits with their pledges, but it does. And, Grover Norquist, as you remember, said that to a media outlet and then walked it back the next day because it earned him a big headline about how it didn't violate the pledge. Well, it doesn't violate his pledge. I mean, if you make this revenue neutral, it doesn't violate the pledge. Same for Americans for Prosperity. So it's, and I want to make sure to change this with something you said. I don't want to exploit any loopholes. I want to go to them on the basis of what they say they believe and what I share with them. And we don't want to grow the government. And so let's talk, Grover, about how we can do that. And Grover has a good point, by the way, which he says to me is, Bob, you can't stop the tax from going up and the corresponding tax cuts from not keeping pace with it. It's a good objection, Grover. So we have to be true to that and to make sure that it really is revenue neutral and that any steadily increasing price in carbon dioxide, which we favor, is paired with a steady reduction in other taxes or a dividend or some mechanism where it doesn't increase the size of government.
That's great. Just to support that, I originally came from the United Kingdom, and the person that put climate change on the agenda was someone who believed in small government, less tax, which is Margaret Thatcher. I mean, she actually got it. I mean, it's so funny, isn't it? That Richard Nixon did all these wonderful things. I mean,
and her friend Ronald Reagan had some wonderful quotes about climate change. I mean, we use those quotes and we use Margaret Thatcher's words.
Right. That's, by the way, I was thinking you might want, if you're comfortable, stand up as you say who you are, because then we can see you.
I'm Diane Callan at the Environmental Law Institute. And I had a question about Australia's passage and then repeal of their carbon tax, and if we've learned anything from a policy perspective about that.
Anybody want to take that?
I know a little bit about it, so I'll have
okay.
I think the Australian lesson is kind of reinforces the point that Bob was making about you need an ally, you need somebody with you. The Australian carbon tax, which was going to evolve to a cap and trade system, was largely one party's policy. The other party started out kind of lukewarm and ended up very, very much opposed to it. And I think they really should have tried hard to keep a sufficient majority with them. So that's point number one. Point number two was the level of it was extremely ambitious. It was $25 a ton, which, when you look around the world, was much higher than anybody else was doing. And so that opened it up to some very easy criticism from that point of view. And the last problem was this is where revenue neutrality becomes a little bit of a challenge. As I understand it, they gave away rather more than 100% of the revenues.
Too late.
They gave away more than 100% of the revenue. Oh, everybody. All sorts. Actually, to be not flippant about it, there was a program for households, there was a program for industry, and there was a number of other specific industrial programs, one not quite called it. So, but the net effect was it was more than the revenue they were raising.
So, so their solution was repeal the tax, but don't stop spending the revenue, which is what they've done.
Correct.
Now, when you talk to businesses from Australia, at least they told me that they now expect a cap and trade program to be the preferred approach Australia will move forward with. So take from what you will.
Well, we had the Secretary of State for Environment for Australia visit us here last week at WRI, and he was telling me that actually their commitment to climate change is still strong. They've done an interesting thing. Instead of taxing carbon emissions or pricing carbon emissions, they're now going to subsidize companies to emit less. So it's sort of it may work, but it's certainly more expensive. Anyway, let's see. Anybody else? Who else was back there? Helen.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Helen Mountford. I'm the Director of Economics here at the World Resources Institute. I've got a two-part question, if I could. And first of all, I think it's following up something that was said about, in terms of businesses, in response to Andrew. How come we don't have it as a priority for some of the major oil companies and others here to look at this and to lobby and to push for carbon pricing? So what would it take to move it up from 100 on the list of priorities to closer to within the top 10? And then following up that, from the public and the government perspective, from a senator's view, what would it take to get the right businesses to talk to senators and to actually listen to those? We know that often it's those who are going to lose from the carbon tax, carbon-intensive industries who are very strong in lobbying. How do we actually get a balanced view there?
Okay, I'll go first. The short answer I'm getting from 100 to maybe 10 is a concrete proposal. The fact that they're with a chance of passing. The fact that this is out there is just something that people like us sit around in rooms talking about. As yet, it's not at the point where businesses need to worry about it. And second point, which kind of goes to something that I suspect Bobby's going to say as well. Businesses are good at stopping things. They're not terribly good at pushing ideas themselves. And part of the reason for that, and this is sort of Bailey speaking, this is just based on hanging around this town for too long. They don't trust the congressional process or regulatory process to actually deliver the same thing that they put in at the start. And I guess there are many companies who are involved with Obamacare that would say that demonstrated the truth of that. So that'd be my recipe is concrete proposal, and then don't expect business to take leads on things like this.
Yeah, and in terms of what it would take the political process to move, it really help if it's chicken or the egg, I guess. If those energy majors put it up at number 10, it would really turn heads, right? I think our most realistic opportunity there is natural gas companies saying, yeah, this works for us. Bad for coal, but works for us. So I think they're a likely head turner, the natural gas folks, because of course the proof that price signals work. Right now in South Carolina, 6 coal-fired plants are being converted to natural gas. Because of the war on coal that was waged not by Barack Obama, but by a guy named George Mitchell, who perfected fracking. That's why 6 coal-fired plants are converting to natural gas in South Carolina right now. And so Barack Obama's war on coal is like the end of Saving Private Ryan, when the captain is down and he's shooting at the tank with his handgun. That's Barack Obama's war on coal. George Mitchell is the tank. And so if you really want to fuss at somebody, well, he's buried in Texas, so you gotta go. That's it shows the strength of the price signal and proves that innovation can happen. We're breathing better in South Carolina right now because of it. I think we need some validators, and natural gas is one of the best places, I think, to get quick validation.
That's great. Thank you very much. I actually want to shift the conversation. We'll come back to the politics, but I'd like to shift it a little bit to sort of what we know and what we don't know. I mean, the handbook basically says, here's what we know, and it's a lot, and it's very, very persuasive. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Adele Morris is here. She's written hundreds of papers on this subject. I'd be interested in knowing sort of what's the intellectual journey we're on right now. I'll take 2 more sentences so you can think of the answer, by the way. That's why I'm making such a long question. So, I mean, what do we know absolutely? What are we pretty sure on, and what do we really need to know? I mean, is that right?
So, oh gosh, thanks. So, well, welcome to my intellectual journey. I mean, I think, your bar chart with the poll response from eminent economists really does say a lot. And there were very similar polls of the membership of the National Tax Association, which is mostly tax economists and tax practitioners. So those of us who think about the intersection of environmental challenges and public finance are all over this, and we get it. And that's well known amongst our profession. We're not always the best communicators, so we're working on that. So I think the things we know a little bit less, I mean, the broad idea of pricing external costs and internalizing externalities, that's really basic economics. What the price should be and how it should evolve over time, maybe we know a little bit less about, because that's dependent on a lot of these challenging analyses of the social cost of carbon and the monetization of a lot of ecological outcomes and outcomes in the distant future. We know a little bit less about that. What we're learning a lot about now, and the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum is working on this right now, is how important the use of the revenue is to the overall economic outcomes of a carbon pricing policy. And we're really understanding that there are important macroeconomic outcomes and distributional outcomes, and trying to strike the right trade-off between getting the most pro-growth net effect and yet being mindful of any possible regressive effects, particularly on poor households. So we're working really hard. The other thing I think we're gradually learning more and more about is pricing carbon relative to how EPA might implement the Clean Air Act and other regulatory measures and other approaches that involve subsidies or standards at the federal or state level. And I think that the consensus is, marching in the direction of saying, look, whatever you think about the exigency of global climatic disruption, I think you can feel confident that there are better, more economically efficient ways to achieve whatever goals you might have had from those other policies. And so I think that really creates a lot of space between people who are uncomfortable with current law and prospective regulation and folks who'd actually like to see more environmental benefits for the efforts that we're undertaking, right? So there is some middle ground there, and I really do think that discussions like this and work that you guys have put together are illustrating, well, what is the space for making a deal? And, I'm optimistic. Life is long, but we've got a real problem, and I firmly believe what Bob said is, call me naive, but I believe in our country's ability to solve problems, and I think this discussion is only going to get more and more important and more serious and more fact-based.
Yeah. Wow, that's terrific. Does anybody want to pick up on that, the intellectual journey? We've got Kevin here. Anything you want to say at this stage? No? Okay, more questions or comments back here. Thank you very much, Adele.
Well, this isn't quite about the intellectual journey, but I wanted to pick up on what Bob Inglis was saying about the spirit in the country that we need, that we really can solve problems. And with a crisis, there's both a problem and an opportunity. And I just often remember my father was on the War Production Board during World War II. And he used to say that, I mean, if there was ever a regulatory role, that was it. When the War Production Board was telling companies what they could and could not manufacture or produce, or what their quotas were, et cetera, et cetera. And they had an advisory board. And on the advisory board, there were government bureaucrats, elected officials, and representatives from industry. And my father used to say one thing that really surprised him, but he learned again as his government service after the war, that oftentimes businesses were the toughest on their own kind. In other words, in this advisory board, the government bureaucrats would say, no, we can't ask business to do that. They'll never agree to this. That's ridiculous. And the business people in the room would say, damn it, we're at war now. This is patriotic duty. They can do it. I know they can do it, and they will do it. We just have to ask them. We have to make them do it. And so my question, I'm sorry, this is quite not the intellectual path we're on, but when do we get to the point where we say, yes, we're at war? There is climate disruption. It's worldwide. You know, it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of now. And to really sort of engender that kind of spirit. And we're all about that, and the pricing mechanism is certainly, as with the Pricing Carbon Initiative, what I'm deeply into, but it's just something that I ponder about often, and thank you.
Well, that's actually a very interesting question, because I get the impression from the congressman that he doesn't think the war analogy is going to work. But Greg, what do you think? And then we'll come to the congressman. Because, you know,
I appreciate the passion of the statement, because ultimately we're not engaged in some academic exercise to figure out the best widget we can create. We're trying to actually solve a problem, and people should be optimistic about our ability to do it. We've been the curve down on our emissions over the last few years. That was not expected. In 2007, we thought we would use more oil every single year into the future, as far as we can see. And now it turns out we're never going to use any more oil than we did in 2010. And so there are many reasons to be optimistic. There's huge stakes. 50% of species going extinct. Sea level rise, food shortages. I mean, these are very serious issues, and they should be talked about as very serious issues. And at the end of the day, if we end up doing a carbon tax, and it's a $5 carbon tax, and we preempt other regulatory tools that can be strengthened in the future, that would be a huge loss that we will all regret.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, Tom, I actually agree with Tom's passion. I think that my comments earlier, notwithstanding about the apocalyptic visions being not helpful, I think it's the question is how you describe them. If you describe it as the opportunity to prove American exceptionalism, then it all turns around. Because Dan Kahan at Yale says that we have different personalities, that progressives are communitarian egalitarians. They're into community and they're into fairness. And conservatives are hierarchical individualists. We're into authority and we believe in individual action. So now if you give me something I can do in that war, then that I can achieve, I'm happy as a conservative. It doesn't occur to a progressive to be concerned about that. Progressives are, apparently from Dan Kahan's research, happy if the whole community figures this out. Not so for conservatives. Conservatives need to be able to say to their grandkids what they did in the war. And so let's play with that and let's use it. And so what I would give as an example of that, Tom, is I was once found myself at a conference in Ireland with way too many people on the left and none of us on the right to be accomplishing as much as I should have been accomplishing in that period of time. But I thought I was going to be attacked as sort of the laggard, the American. Why are you people so slow? And why can't you figure this out? A bunch of Europeans there. That was not at all the affect, especially from the Irish. They were basically saying to me as an American, we need you to act. We're counting on you. And if more Americans heard that, it's like on the way to the airport this morning, I heard a tearful, very emotional comment from a guy about honor flights. I mean, if we can tie into that patriotism that the world counted on us once before to stop this slide into totalitarian, the abyss, then they're counting on us again on this climate change. And do you have it in you, America, to solve this? Put in those terms, conservatives got something they can do, and they can say what they did in the war day. And speaking of words, David's going to speak next, and you can tell from the accent that he can understand this, that Winston Churchill, he said about us, always count on the Americans to do the right thing. After they've exhausted every other option.
That's great, David.
That is indeed an accurate quote from Churchill. I don't want to sort of puncture the bubble about this too much, but give you a sort of separate example, and I'll come back to the point. I teach a class at Georgetown, but every now and then I go to SAIS and do a class on climate change. One of the things I do is 30 people in the class, ask them how much they'd be willing to pay today to avoid one of them losing $1,000 in 50 years' time. And a significant number of people in the class would say nothing. And the point I'm making is that victory in this case is not as it was in the Second World War, or as you were talking about it, Bob, a year away or 2 years away. Victory, to the extent it gets achieved, not only relies on other people acting in the same way, but we may not know we won until 50 years' time.
And I agree with that. It just sounds like I'm agreeing with everybody here. I was a politician after all. But I think that's one reason why it's very helpful to speak of this in moral terms as well. It's not just an economic discussion, because if you do it simply in economics, it isn't enough. Because the heart decides and the head justifies. And so we have to find what Tom was talking about is some entree into the heart. Then the head can justify anything that the heart's already decided. And so, and that's why I think if you put it people in those numbers kind of way, it's really hard to get people to agree because it's so far away, or appears so far away.
And that's why, Lord Nicholas Stern, said he'd never write another report like the Stern report, because it basically assumed you'd come at this through cost-benefit analysis. And of course, economists need to know cost of inaction all the way out for 100 years, cost of action, and then they need to know a discount rate that brings it all. And you immediately get into a discussion of interest rate. I mean, a 6% discount rate will make $100 100 years from today worth only 25 cents today, i.e. nothing, exactly the same. And even a 1.3% interest rate, which Nick Stern recommended in his Stern report, even that, $100 100 years from today will be worth only $25. And that's a very, very low discount rate. Question or comment back there?
Hi everyone, my name is Pierre Cazeneuve. I'm a local elective official from France, as you can notice by my amazing accent. My question is directly from Congressman Inglis. You say something amazing sooner. You say the economic consensus is bigger than the scientific consensus on the climate issue. This is true, but you have also the international community consensus on that. And I know that because in my city from Paris, in December, it's going to be nearly 200 countries that are going to meet up for COP21 in Paris to discuss about climate change. And also, I'm sure you have seen the last report from Yale, University of Yale, who say that nearly 70% of the Americans believe that climate change is happening. So my question is about strategy and political strategy from the Republican Party. Why are you not moving 180 degrees on this issue? It's going to happen. Like people now, I'm not saying climate change is happening. I'm saying everyone going to think it will happening really soon. So why does the Conservative Party keep on this track?
Merci, Congressman.
I think it's kept on this track because of the Great Recession. And when a tribe is under pressure, orthodoxy becomes really important. When the tribe is less stressed, it's okay if you sort of are more open to ideas, right? And so in the Great Recession, it became orthodoxy to say, we don't believe in climate change. I was on the wrong side of that orthodoxy. And so I got myself on the wrong side of that orthodoxy, right? But let me offer you some encouragement. 2014, it was an agnostic position. I'm not a scientist. Now we're in a very short-lived position, which is we can't do it. We're not China. We can't afford it. It can't be done. And I would submit to you that that's short-lived on my side of the street because that isn't what Republicans believe. Republicans believe in an exceptional America that can solve problems. And so it'll be short-lived. The next stop, I think the obvious stop is, of course, free enterprise can solve climate change. And so if we can change the question from is it a fact, which is sort of a belief question, into can free enterprise solve climate change, you initiate a different discussion. It's a discussion of solutions.
Great, thank you so much. Down here.
Mike Ryan with IHS. I mean, so even within Democratic constituencies, should we expect pushback? Because, I mean, if there's a carbon tax, could you also justify taxes on junk food or gambling? So it's kind of, you know, where does this go from here, right? So, yeah.
Actually, we had a great event at the University of Chicago called What Would Milton Friedman Do About Climate Change? And I think for all the economists in the room, you can check me out on this. Milton Friedman actually addressed that sort of thing. He would say the difference is, if I'm eating junk food, it's my choice. But if I'm living downwind of a power plant, it's not my choice. And so that's where he says there is a role for the government in attaching negative externalities when there isn't a consenting party to the transaction. He said that on the Phil Donahue show, which I grew up watching. But I got home from school in the afternoons. I don't know how I became a conservative. I was watching Phil Donahue in the afternoons. But anyway, I must be a reactionary myself. So anyway, yeah, I think that's the difference. Is I can choose how much junk food I want to eat, but I can't choose the air that I breathe.
Good. Another question. By the way, Christina, you're tucked in, so I can't exactly see you. But whenever you want to say something, say it.
Okay. I don't have anything right
Okay.
now. Thanks.
Back there, Molly.
Hi, Molly McGregor, WRI, and my question is regarding the fuel commodity prices. Excuse me, and how many of you said you're optimistic, and as far as political winds changing, how you view lower, gas price, oil dollar per barrel reaching under $100 this year, how that's really changing the dynamic, and maybe Christine, you could say a little bit more on that as well.
Well, I think other folks might have more to say on that, but like David. But one thing is that I don't think it's going to undermine moving in the right direction, because quite honestly, one of the things that was really substantial in the slowing down of the cap and trade bill across the finish line is that gas prices were skyrocketing. We were moving into a huge recession, and people become very frightened about new things and new ideas when that's happening. So while I understand the argument that prices are going down, therefore why do we need to do this, I actually think it makes people less hysterical in an economic sense, and they're more capable of having rational conversations about why we want to do this. But other people may have different points of view on that.
Yeah, I basically agree with Christina. I think, firstly, I'm not sure how long it will last. I think there is a corrective mechanism. I don't think we're going to get, for a while anyway, back up to where we were. But that's, my opinion is not really worth much in the market, I'm afraid. But basically, Christine's right. I think to the extent that prices stay lower, it's actually favourable towards the kind of carbon pricing that we're talking about.
Yeah, we just actually brought out a paper on that through the New Climate Economy, which looks at the impact across different sectors, and it's, as you say, it's modest. Obviously, for electric cars, it's the most dramatic, but otherwise, it could, and above all, it gives an opportunity to reduce or eliminate the $500 billion of energy subsidies. Yes, Jane.
Hi, my name is June Taylor. I'm with an organization called Get America Working, which has for many years proposed something that Bob English proposed when he was in Congress, which is to have a carbon tax and use the money to reduce the payroll tax, both for workers, which would be good, give them a raise, and would also for businesses. And Obama did the temporary holiday tax, payroll tax holiday, which the CBO scored as the most effective job creator of the stimulus. I wonder how much more effective it would have been if they'd also given it to business. But what I'm wondering about, I'm looking at this fabulous chart you have here that shows the, how many policy goals can be achieved by reducing distortionary taxes. And that's the winner, is removing distortionary taxes. But what I'm wondering is there room for some sort of a grand bargain? Like, I'd be willing to give a little bit to deficit reduction and some to corporate tax reduction if we could get, a portion for payroll tax reduction. Is there a grand bargain to be had?
Grand bargain. Greg.
I think probably the reason everyone's here is because there's some hope that there is a possibility of this. I mean, I think people are, this is exactly what we should be exploring, is whether or not there is some way of getting this done.
And I would just jump in on that. That's really, more than anything, I think what is evidenced here by the different points of view, all saying this is a sound policy, but coming at it from a lot of different perspectives.
I might add that, in the President's State of the Union address in 2014, he said, it is a fact about climate change. I don't think he was helping us. I think what he should have said, if I could have written that speech for him, is, you folks on, he could have said this, I got a deal for you. Folks on my side of the aisle are ready to vote to price carbon dioxide. I understand that you folks on this side of the aisle insist on it being revenue neutral. So how about this? Turns to John. John, we'll give you the votes for pricing carbon dioxide. You choose the corresponding tax cuts. Then we'd be out of the box we're in right now. What is John then going to do? John, in his fondest dreams, wants to cut corporate income taxes. But the marginal members come to him and say, John, if we do that, it's a 30-second ad that says, Congressman Republican so-and-so voted to increase Widow Jones's energy rates. Meanwhile, he cut corporate income taxes for ExxonMobil. Vote Democrat Smith, right? And so John would go to the obvious place that Jane wants him to go, I think, which is FICA tax reduction. And then John removes the regressivity argument, and we've got a deal on tax law. And so that would work, but it takes some bold leadership. It takes something out of the box. I think it can work.
Greg, do you think maybe Hillary Clinton, she's running for president, could make that offer?
Well, I don't think any politician might actually make that offer from looking at the State of the Union. But I'm young. Who knows? Maybe I'll see it. I think that there's this conversation that can be had, and I think that Congressman is absolutely correct that telling people that you pay a little bit more at the gasoline pump in order to pay for a corporate tax cut is going to go over pretty poorly. And by the way, we want to let utilities off the hook from being regulated. I mean, I just don't think that's going to be the package. I do think that there's a great conversation to be had, and I hope people can continue to cross the ideological spectrum in a way that can generate momentum.
Thank you very much. Yes.
This is Rob Walcott. I've been listening carefully to Tom's energy and heart, and Bob, your faith in the entrepreneurial attitude and capacity of this nation. Also thinking of the environmental movement, it's largely been founded on defensive language and defensive action. We are the Environmental Defense Fund. We're the Natural Resources Defense Council. We are defenders of wildlife. We are, I could go on. And in economics, we work in a kind of consumer economics, constrained optimization world, but we also have production theory. And I think if we were to embrace some of that language, which is, let's talk about producing climate stability together, and embracing tax strategies, embracing other than tax strategies, but to focus the Klieg light on that which is positive and affirmative, the outcome of climate stability, and a collective production of the outcome, not in denial of and delusion of that we're not in need of constraining greenhouse gas emission rates, but that we can collectively embrace and shape policy to achieve climate stability.
Okay. I guess you would agree.
I think it's called selling the sizzle, right? I mean,
hey, there's a lot of sizzles to be sold, and a lot of people counting on it. And if it can be not just sold better, but really embedded better in people's fiber in terms of how they relate to this. And I think you put the point on, hey, we could do this together. We don't necessarily have a war production board, but an attitude that embraces that.
Yeah, because we want to. There's some good things that can come from this, right? More mobility, more freedom, more energy. It's sold that way. And by the way, it has a benefit of being true, I think, because that's what energy innovation can be: is more energy. Distributed energy systems that light up dark places of the world right now. And if we play our cards right, we can serve those customers by selling them those systems. This is where I would think my friend Jim Dement at the Heritage Foundation is exactly correct. Those answers are going to come from developed economies. And so we shouldn't be cursing the people in developed economies and saying these capitalist pigs. What we should be saying is, no, these wonderful people who are interested in selling services to people and making money off of by serving their customer. If you serve your customer well, you get repeat customers. And so there's a whole world waiting for distributed energy systems. Now, I think some of those utilities are really worried about that switch. And it's threatening. Where you sit determines where you stand, right? And so if you sit on a board of a public utility, you might be a little bit frightened by what I've just said. But if you're elsewhere, you think this is going to be great. My roof is going to be a profit center for me. And I'm going to be selling power, and that monopolistic power company is going to take it from me. And so, I mean, now we're talking a message. Sorry, it doesn't work too well for for some utilities, but it works for the Tea Party. It works for Debbie Dooley at the Green Tea Coalition, and we're all excited about that because then you get something good out of this thing, not just the avoidance of that loss. Years hence, but I get something out of it now, which is, wow, my roof making power for me, storing in a battery in my house, and when I've got excess power, I'm selling it on the grid. That's pretty exciting stuff.
It certainly is. Yes. So I think we have a theme emerging here, which I like a lot.
James Hanley, Carbon Tax Center. I have a question about another structure for a possible grand bargain. About a year ago, sort of as a parting shot, when Chairman Baca stepped down from the Senate Finance Committee, his staff released a report about subsidy reform, and included in that report was a suggestion about a carbon tax. And what he was suggesting was, what the staff was suggesting was, they looked at the energy picture in terms of prices and subsidies contains 42 different kinds of subsidies scattered across the markets, and it's the most convoluted, irrational, economically distorting map of any industry or sector that I could possibly conjure up. And what Baucus was suggesting was trying to simplify this into just two policies, and one of those would have been some kind of a carbon price. And to me, that is a far more economically powerful engine for some kind of reform than I think almost anything else that I've even looked at. The Carbon Tax Center put together a report responding to Baucus's report, suggesting that eliminating all energy subsidies on both sides, the green and the bad, and the bad is 50 times the size of the green, so it's a good deal for the enviros. And imposing a carbon tax would have far more economic and climate and overall environmental benefits than almost any other policy change you could imagine.
Right. Why don't you start, Greg? But then I also want to ask, I've got a written question that's very consistent with that, which David, you earlier on said, a lot of these subsidy programs on the green side actually are really inefficient, but also, I think as you rightly point out, the subsidies on the brown side also, which are bigger, are also very inefficient. So I'd like you to talk about both of them. But you go first, Greg.
I was going to say is I just think evaluating any proposal like that, you want to see what does it actually do to emissions. I mean, I think that's what the goal is, and I wouldn't have any sort of, if we get it down from 5 pages to 2 pages, that's a win, I would say. What's it doing to the atmosphere?
I'm not familiar with the Carbon Tax Center's report. I should be. My apologies. I would be very surprised if the numbers are as you described, but I'll accept that. I suspect the issue is what counts as a subsidy, and whether a subsidy which applies to the whole of industry, just because it happens to go to industries that are in fossil fuel, counts as a subsidy. That's a angels on a pin question. But it is certainly true that there are subsidies to fossil fuels, no matter how big they are. That's the question. And certainly a bonfire of all those subsidies is probably a good idea in terms of simplifying the tax code. I'm not sure that there's quite as much there to go at, but the Baucus report and the principles behind it certainly seem to me to be a good idea.
And on the green side, you were a bit disparaging about some of the subsidies there.
Yes, I mean, the problem is not so much that the subsidies are there. I don't have a problem if we're trying to encourage a particular fuel. It's that they are structured generally without clear objectives. There are very few marginal incentives to actually keep reducing costs. And there are some of the programs, for example, in the Stimulus Act, a lot of the effect was simply to transfer to the federal government the cost of meeting California's electricity mandate. Because a lot of the subsidies were, the finances that were in that program were paying for solar generation that was, if you believe the California mandate was going to happen anyway.
Thank you very much. We're heading sort of towards the end now, but let's take a few more. Yes, back there. And by the way, the idea is you might want to comment on other people's questions. It's not all wisdom resides up here. So please.
Is it on? Yeah. Andrea Yotsampa, Deploy US. So this week I've been hearing a lot of sort of realism about this. We're in this for the long haul. It's going to take a long time. And that may be true. But Bob, you said you never know when you're approaching a tipping point and what's going to tip. And I think there's a chance we can move much more quickly on this. And because all of us would like to see that happen, I'm interested in your analysis, especially you, Bob, of what are the 3 top things that need to happen to get us to the tip politically?
Let's see, 3 top things. I think some validation, some news outlets changing their perspective. That's 2 big ones. I got some nominations for the news outlets that could change, if you want to hear them. If we could get something on the pages of the Wall Street Journal that was besides denial stuff, that would be a huge help. Just some key businesses saying that works for them. I think a third thing that's coming, and I'm very excited about it, and has been mentioned here, and it's a little bit strange maybe to mention in the context of economics, is the Pope's encyclical that's going to come out. It's just going to be, I anticipate being wonderful. I'm an Episcopalian, and I love the fact that he's about to say what I hope is consistent with the Papal Scientific Society, which if you read their statement on climate change, it's absolutely beautiful. And so a whole lot of devout Catholics who have derided other Catholics as being cafeteria Catholics that don't accept the Church's teaching on things like abortion will now be put in a situation of answering the question A2. Get that French right, brother. Anyway, are you also a cafeteria Catholic if you don't accept the Church's teaching on climate change? Because this could be in the form of encyclical. This is very exciting. And so the dissonance that's going to be happening over at that building with the big dome on top of it is going to really be creative. So I think this, and then he's coming to speak in September. So, I remember when Mother Teresa came to speak at the National Prayer Breakfast one year. I was a conservative guy, right? I'm quite pro-life. And so when she came out, so there was nothing about prayer. I just hoped she might mention abortion. Well, Mother Teresa spent about 2 paragraphs on other things, and then the rest of the speech was about abortion. And so, just an amazing presentation by Mother Teresa. The next year, Bill Clinton, Andrew Young, I guess it was, who was chairing the breakfast, said, it's another guy, Andrew Young was speaking that year. The chairman of the prayer breakfast said, the president, was Bill Clinton at the time, had an unprecedented level of involvement in this year's prayer breakfast. Well, I wonder why. Last year he had to sit there and listen to Mother Teresa the entire time with Hillary sitting next to him. Now, imagine when the Pope comes to speak in Congress in September, if he gets on climate change and doesn't let up, what is that going to do? So if you know him, by the way, could you please suggest that he get on climate change and not let up when he's talking to Congress in September? So business validation and news outlets, and then I'm very excited about what the Pope may do.
Thank you.
That is great. Yes, back here.
Hi, Amy Schmidt, Citizens Climate Lobby. I think that this is probably best answered by either you, Bob, and certainly David. We talked a little about these conversations that we would be having, and as an economist, to me, incentives matter. They matter greatly. So I was wondering, how would the conversation go if you both went out to lunch with David and Charles Koch? And you were advocating that they embrace something that will address climate change.
I accept the invitation because I want to go to lunch with the Koch brothers. They used to support me. In 6 and 8, they gave me the maximum PAC contribution, not so much in 10. Something about that 2009 Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act that Jane mentioned, I think. But anyway, so I would go to lunch with them. I would happily, because I think we should challenge people to believe, to do what they say they believe, to live what they say they believe. They say they're libertarians. I'm a Republican. There used to be a difference. Not so much right now. But anyway, but they say they're libertarians, and I think I understand and I respect this of libertarians, really deeply respect this, that they believe in transparent and accountable marketplaces. We got a big old pile of cash, Charles and David. Is your time on this planet really about just adding to that pile of cash? Is that all this life is about? Or do you really believe that this freedom concept that you've got is powerful? And if so, you will man up and test all of your products in an accountable, transparent marketplace where all subsidies are removed and all costs are attached. Now, how much you believe in free enterprise? And so just challenge them to live what they say they believe. And I can't imagine that those two guys really want to just pile up more money. They cannot use all the money they've got. They literally cannot. So it's so it must be that they believe something more deeply. And so we just need to challenge them to believe to live what they say they believe. And I don't think it would be I'm making it sound like an antagonistic conversation, but I think it'd be a positive conversation. That lead, show us, you add to that list of people. That would change things. If they say, we are no longer opposing this, what WRI is saying, we can be on with. If they said that, this thing would be over. So, anybody know? I'm happy. I'll give you my calendar and we will find time for lunch. I'll buy even. Might be at Wendy's, but...
Anyone else on this?
Bob is absolutely right. He's much more persuasive than I am. I think the only thing I would add to that is to ask them how they, do they not recognise that the current regime is putting prices on carbon anyway? Wouldn't it be better to have a more transparent and open system? And I think that, again, plays to the sort of libertarian argument a little bit. Because there is this belief, which I find very difficult to understand, in many people in these companies, that there is no price on carbon. That's just not true. There is one.
Right. Okay, back there. We'll make this the last, unless there are. Anyone else want to ask a question urgently? Two more. One there and one there. We'll take them two together.
It's Jack Warner, Institute for Sustainable Power, Climate Institute. As you know, Exelon's trying to buy Pepco out, and there's a debate going on in Illinois right now in terms of their proposal as it relates to nuclear and subsidies for nuclear power plants, which they have many of. The question is what they proposed is an idea that energy suppliers need to purchase credits from carbon-free energy producers. And in terms of the EPA rule, that have EPA allow that so that nuclear can, in a sense, become part of the mix again in terms of what's going to be available for carbon reduction activities by the electric utilities. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, if you'd agree with that kind of a market approach in terms of having the electric suppliers buy credits from carbon-free energy producers under the EPA rule that's being proposed.
Since that was pretty technical, let's take David and maybe Kevin, you want to as well.
I think nuclear has to be the carbon-free energy picture. I know that's uncomfortable to a lot of people, but it seems to me that has to be part of the picture. If you can't get a carbon tax, then I guess something like that is frankly a long way the second best option. I would much prefer a standard carbon price. But something that puts a price into it is better than nothing.
Good, thank you. One over there, last one.
Tim Letts, I work on business engagement around climate change for World Wildlife Fund, and so I'd really like to pull the thread on, Congressman, your last comment about business validation. What businesses would you want to hear talking about this, and what do they need to say to effectively influence policymakers?
I think they need to say that this could work for them, and particularly if they could show how the border adjustment would work. That would be very helpful. We haven't talked about that too much yet, but that'd be very helpful if they could say, otherwise what you end up with, and this is what I guess I've sounded pretty critical of the administration here, but if he's successful in this 111D, it's a domestic-only, clumsiest possible mechanism to price carbon dioxide. It's domestic-only, and so we could end up being the double losers. Not only do you lose employment to people who pick up and move to places who don't internalize that negative externality, but you also lose the race to reduce global emissions. Because when they pick up and move there, they can emit more. And so if we had some businesses come along saying, listen, this is what effective border adjustment would look like, and we can, and then they could reassure some members of Congress and the Senate from industrial places that it's okay, there's a way to work with this. That would be a particularly powerful validation from somebody that can say, is an industry that can say, we can live with this, it's going to be all right for us. Because if the border adjustment is effective, then I gotta believe that if it's upheld by the WTO, that China, within 24 hours, because they have an amazing way of reaching consensus, as you know, will price carbon dioxide the same way. And when they do, the rest of the world follows suit. Without any agreements, without any of this bowing and scraping and for effort at the UN, it's rather a bold commercial move by the United States. A little bit like T-Mobile, if they were just bigger, they could make my stinking cell phone company give me contractless service. But I'm in an indentured servitude contract with my wireless provider for about 10 years, I think, for the devices that my family has, right? But if T-Mobile were just a little bigger, they could force my company to offer me the same. That's where I think that border adjustment is so important, and I think that validation, if there are businesses that step forward and say, this works, even though we're an intensive industry here, we can live with this.
Just on this private sector one, in terms of the emerging potential leadership in the private sector, because this is obviously, we've spoken today a lot about politics, but obviously what we really need is a group of private sector leaders that come forward. I mean, today, financial markets are valuing Tesla in a way that implies they believe in it. I mean, when Elon Musk started Tesla, everyone said, are you nuts? I mean, there's never been a new automobile company successful in 50 years, and you guys aren't even automobile manufacturers. And I think still today, they're selling less than 1% of General Motors, but their stock market value is half. In other words, half of General Motors. In other words, the markets seem to be thinking we're moving in a certain direction, right? And the question is, do you believe that? And do you believe that as time marches on, I mean, today the French government and the G20 are going to call upon a serious central bank regulator assessment of stranded assets, for example. So do you feel things are sort of inexorably heading in the right direction with regard to the perception of the private sector? Yeah, David.
We've written, my company, my partner and I, David Bookbinder is at the back, we've written about Tesla on our website, and I refer you to my earlier answer there. I think the answer is no. I don't think that the market pressure yet is pushing people to where you're talking about them going.
So still a lot of work to do. Well, this brings us to a close. There are drinks outside, so you may feel you need them. I just wanted to make, there was a very interesting comment earlier on by our friend here from the Department of Transportation. And it was important because you were saying, shouldn't we do this rather than, wouldn't it be more effective to do the following regulations? And I think we at WRI feel very strongly it's not an either or. We absolutely need to recognize that actually there are several market failures going on here, and there are information failures, and so we absolutely need, a regulatory environment that's strong. But we feel, and I think everyone on this panel feels very strongly, that at the moment, the United States, which is taking some bold moves, is actually, acting with one arm tied behind its back. And as we move forward to a real transformation of the economy in exactly the positive way that Bob and others were talking about, we really need to use the most effective tools. And so even although the moment is not now, we need to be ready for when that tipping point comes. So we have no idea, obviously, when that tipping point will come, but history of the world and the history of politics and the history of public opinion is that tipping points come much sooner than are expected, as we've seen in gay marriage and we're seeing in many issues around the world all the time. And so I think what our desire is, certainly here at WRI, is to be sort of helpful in getting ready for that tipping point and bringing that tipping point a little closer to us. And honestly, to have you guys here today was such a treat. I mean, that was really great insights, and obviously this requires some sophisticated thinking through, because there are those on the other side that are using both blunt and sharp instruments, and we don't need to think of this as a war, but we do need to be thoughtful and sophisticated with the right information and the right format, going to the right time, spoken by the right people in the right place, in order to bring that tipping point to fruition. Thanks very much to the team that wrote this report. Please take it home, read every word of it.